what are the programs that you're familiar with?
Wit and Wisdom, Expeditionary Learning. We're in a year 1 pilot right now, and then some a little bit of the Bookworms curriculum.
Okay. And how are you familiar with Wit and Wisdom?
So 5 years ago, our schools were awarded a school improvement grant, just state and federal grant for improving outcomes for kids and community. And we got a chance to pilot some new language arts curriculum for the future side. So teachers had the opportunity to get some modules and test them out in the spring and give some advice on which curriculum they thought that would be best for kids at certain grade levels. And our 3rd through 5th grade teachers selected Wit and Wisdom.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, what do you like most about it? Or what do teachers like about it? What do kids like about it? And then on the flip side, what do they not like about the different curriculum? You can just go pros and cons for each one if you don't mind.
Yeah. So with Wit and Wisdom, teachers and kids really liked the writing instruction piece. So they were writing throughout the day. So it wasn't just this one writing block. And so kids started to feel like they had more input. It also led their discussions a little bit better. So we also did a side focus on academic discussions and how to implement small groups. So kids were writing throughout the day across content. Teachers were able to get kids to give their input in many different ways. So it was small group discussions, whole group discussions, writing. Kids were giving feedback to one another on the writing. So that was the strong point for Wit and Wisdom with both kids and teachers. A con was the amount of time that it took to plan out like a week's worth of lessons. I mean, then there were spaces where the vocabulary and phonics sections weren't very strong. So we had to do some more PD around vocabulary development. It was also very time consuming. So teachers had to, we were in a position where we were able to pay teachers for their time. So extra hours of planning with coaches, we were able to pay for PD from the publishers themselves. So that's a con because that's not something that is available to everyone, right? Also still, even with all of that extra vocabulary development, teacher development, professional development, planning time, you'd still be missing, there'd still be gaps, right? There were still gaps in curriculum, gaps in the amount of time that it took to plan. I mean, they always felt like they were rushing, even when we were in person in school. So Wit and Wisdom was it was very top heavy. And so teachers really anchored into the writing, kids really anchored into the writing. They anchored into the format of the academic discussions, and that rolled out some positives across content areas. But as far as actual like reading instruction, like we didn't get past the first module as far as the literature that kids were supposed to be reading. We never made it out of the first module in 2 years.
Well, you didn't make it out of the first module because time ran out, or what do you mean?
Because, teachers want to do a really good job of making sure kids at each level understand the books, understand the vocabulary and the reading. You spend so much time on the background knowledge for vocabulary development that you didn't really get into the reading. Even kids who are proficient readers, you have your small groups, but when you're building in like reading materials, guided reading materials for kids who might not be at grade level, and you still want them to have access to grade level content, it just got to a point where we couldn't get out of, we never got past the first 4 books in the first module.
Okay, what's next? Which one's next?
Expeditionary learning, it's kind of interesting because the first few books for upper elementary are the same as the first 4 books for Wit and Wisdom. So we didn't have to order new materials. We already had them. So there are a lot of comparisons there. We've been doing it virtually the entire time. The teachers like the lesson plans. There are some scripted aspects. Our teachers are really well versed in the technology side anyway. So manipulating slides and instructing students in how to, share screens, manipulate slides, share their writing, share their reading, wasn't as big of a lift for our upper elementary students as it might be at some other schools. Because we've had, access to technology through our grant. One thing that is not working out very well is the writing section for expeditionary learning with us. So it's the opposite. Well, in person, we'd probably get a lot more done, but with the instructional minutes being so short, and teachers wanting to make sure that kids are reading and having more discussions, we're not actually anchoring into the writing as much as we were when we had Wit and Wisdom. But the teachers prefer the format for expeditionary learning. Again, there was buy-in from our teachers. We had an opportunity for them to meet with teachers who were already in the first year pilot before they did some compare and contrast between, I think it was EL, F&P, classroom, and staying with Wit and Wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And they chose to join the second year pilot for expeditionary learning.
Okay. And what do you know of Bookworms, the pros and cons?
So I had an opportunity to observe a classroom using Bookworms, and the small group piece especially for high frequency words, letter sounds, and reading fluency. I actually had an opportunity to start working with a small group of kindergartners before we left for the shelter in place. So we were going to roll it out in a first grade class and 2 kindergarten classes, but we didn't have that opportunity. The best thing about it is that all of the materials come with the program. So we didn't have to worry about, buying extra decodables. We didn't have to worry about buying an online component. We didn't have to worry about, because it's open source, so we didn't have to worry about spending money. We also didn't have to worry about, putting the materials together because they came already, like the intervention materials came together already. So it was a lot less planning time for my kinder and first grade teachers. So that was one of the huge reasons why I was really excited about rolling it out for small groups and primary, because for kinder and first especially, prep time is everything. Putting materials together, making sure that they have the right items for right groups is huge. So with Bookworms, all of that came.
Do you have what's the experience level or years of service, more or less, of your folks at that level?
So my kinder teachers currently average, I have one teacher who's a super senior, so maybe 12 years. So we go anywhere between 3 and 12 years on the kinder side. And first grade, we go between 5 to, I have a super senior, so I have a 25-year vet. And then I've got 5 years to 3 years.
But what about drawbacks or negatives from?
I didn't see any, and it's only because I had such a short time with it, right? So if we'd had, I got it 3 weeks before shelter in place, immediately started working with the highest need kindergartners that my 4 kinder teachers could provide me with. And then a couple of weeks later, and my teachers had just gotten the materials. And then as soon as we were ready to roll it out, I was the guinea pig. And so as soon as we were ready to roll it out for the teachers, the classroom teachers, it was time to close it down. So
What about, okay, so you have the perspective of all 3 of those programs. What about the conditions of success for the different programs? Like, based on your experience, would you say that they fit any particular type of environment better than the others? Or just what are the conditions that you would say, in order for this to work, you have to make sure you have this in place, or this has to be set up, or what have you?
So the first thing is, for all of those programs, principals and teachers have to be aligned in what aspects they need in order to be successful. So do teachers understand that every student, regardless of home language, needs academic English instruction, and also, like EL, it doesn't matter what you call it, ELD, AED, whatever. That has to be embedded every day in classes. We also have to have vocabulary development. So lots of people don't know about, whatever strategy they want to use, Marzano's, you can use whatever. They don't know about, they may have had GLAD training, aren't sure how to use it. So before you dive into any program, it's, do my teachers have the knowledge to implement vocabulary strategies so that we're not spending all day, struggling through 2 vocabulary words? Do we know that we can embed some GLAD strategies for language development, whether academic English or, language learners? Do we understand, how to map this out so that maybe I'm not doing a 3-hour language arts block, but I'm chopping it up throughout the day so that kids have an opportunity to use some of these skills across content areas. If you don't go into any of these programs knowing that, then it's going to be a mess either way. Also, if you don't have the resources, doesn't matter who the students are. If you don't have the resources to get your teachers professional development, vocabulary development, GLAD strategies, pacing, classroom management, student engagement, then it's a disaster anyway.
As far as professional development goes, the load on coaches, the demand for high quality support, professional development, is any higher with one or the other, or is it all about the same?
The one thing is the time commitment, right? So it can't just be, what we tend to do is like a year of intensive PD, and then the next year figure it out on your own.
That's right.
It doesn't work. We found with Wit and Wisdom that for 2 years, we needed publishers, we needed instructional coaches, we needed to make sure that everybody was trained up 3-4 times a year on curriculum, pacing, checking in with them and like letting them know where we were. We kind of had a running sheet going of where we were as far as lessons, what some pitfalls were, what was working really well. We started out really strong with expeditionary learning as far as like having really strong PD the first 3 months or so. And now we have TSAs who are leading, which is fine if they have like a deep understanding of the program. But I haven't seen that yet. And I also haven't seen the level of engagement from the teachers who are participating in these PDs. Like, they're overwhelmed right now with all the other things right now. So to have a peer who may or may not have taught the curriculum or who may or may not have had an opportunity to, dive in with some of the challenges that are happening, it's just a different lens. The lens isn't wide enough. So I think we need to commit to at least 3 solid years of high-level PD from the publishers, from teachers from other districts like ours, who have a high Black and Brown student population with varying levels of literacy, various home support, who can kind of guide us through how to best implement and how to best make this work for kids.
You mentioned planning and teachers being a little overwhelmed right now because they've got a lot of else going on. Also, there's a math adoption that's coming up too. But just in terms of ELA, do you have a sense about, from the different programs, how much planning is required to do it the way it's designed to be done, to have all the components taught, not put anything to the side? Because my assumption is, and the NAACP, our assumption is that these programs are crafted, designed a certain way for a reason. They include different components so that it hits all the important things. So to do everything and to do everything well, what's the lift for teachers in terms of planning? Did you get a sense of that from folks?
Yeah, so our teachers, and I would say like the majority of teachers want to do a good job, right? They don't want to like do the bare minimum. They are invested in students and they build relationships with kids and families and they want to do their best, right? My teachers were averaging between 5 and 7 hours outside of school a week to plan the lessons and to ensure that they were, delivering as much quality instruction as they possibly could.
For which program?
Wit and Wisdom.
Okay.
For expeditionary learning, it's really interesting for us because when our teachers reached out to teachers at the original pilot sites, they were looking at the in-person model, right? So they were looking at, in-person materials, in-person, instruction, and they were seeing like another 3 to 5 hours a week extra planning outside. It seems to be the same for virtual, because now, even though the slides are there for you and there's a little bit of a script there for you, you're still trying to figure out a way like so what part of this do I need to pull for this small group? And then I have a limited amount of time to do it. And so there's also the feeling of failure because they know that they're not giving kids the instruction that they need. So they're trying to do all the things in, 20, 30-minute blocks. And they know it's not working. So they're continuing to plan like, okay, I know this piece is really, really important. And I know that it's a focus standard. I need to make sure that the kids are getting this. So I think it's frenetic planning now outside of their contract hours to make sure that the kids are getting at least the bare minimum of what they need.
Um, what about bookworms? You have a sense of the planning for that one?
Once it took me, and I'm a K1 teacher, so it took me about a weekend to digest the materials and the plans. And then it took me maybe an hour to get, the information together. And, once I had my kids and I did the initial, the pre-assessment kind of diagnostic to figure out where they were. Their teachers gave me the latest assessment results, and then I kind of built my groups from there. It took me about an hour and a half to get those groups and materials together, and then just rolled it out from there.
But I mean, on a regular basis though. So an hour and a half to get your groups. But what about planning your lessons?
So the way the lessons roll out, it's based on the diagnostics, right? So your diagnostic kind of guides you towards what materials and what lesson you're going to be presenting. So I would say, I don't even have hours, Kareem, but I would say for me, it would probably take, 1 to 2 hours to plan and prepare things together. I would say it would probably take my teachers an additional couple of hours a week just for that section though. So we were just focusing on phonics, phonemic awareness, and fluency.
So about 3 hours for the week.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other ones, a little more, 5 hours, as high as 7 hours.
Yes.
This is okay.
This is every week. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad I asked. All right. So what about supports? So part of the planning challenge is making sure that, English language learners are getting what they need. The kids who are below are getting what they need. Your kids who are dyslexic and who are struggling, just like all these different subgroups have got to get their stuff and preferably in core instruction, not until, they get to tier 2. So the question is that stuff baked into these programs, or is it like an addendum? You know what I mean? Like, is there a separate book for this and a separate book for that? Or is it on the margins consider doing this? Or is it part of the core instruction that's set up in the program?
In Wit and Wisdom, it's not part of the program. It's not included in the program at all. So that's one of those things where it's like, if you know as an instructional leader that you have kids that have dyslexia, or kids that haven't been diagnosed with dyslexia yet, but you see some signs. Kids who, whose home language is not a written language, right? So like our mom speakers. Kids who are African-American kids who may not have a strong academic English background, but have a strong vocabulary background. Like they're able to code switch and able to figure some things out. That's not built in at all. So you have to kind of use your prior knowledge to figure out okay, how do I support teachers and kids with PD, with planning, with coaching. And then you have to have coaches who know these things too, right? If you're not able to spend money on PD from an outside source. So that's huge for us too. If we're not able to get support from the publishers for a number of years, then you're spending site-based funds that could be used on books, that could be used on personnel, on outside PD.
Professional development, yeah, professional development. Okay.
With EL Ed, I don't feel like I can speak on that because we're only doing the virtual piece, right? There's a lot online. There's a lot, it's open source as well. There's a lot in those, in the resources that we have, but I know that our teachers haven't had that kind of time to dive into it yet, So I would wonder what it looks like, during summer planning, when we're getting closer to some semblance of in-person, and what that looks like for our kids and for our teachers.
What about scriptedness? Like, some people think we shouldn't have scripts, programs should have scripts. Is there room for creativity in these things? Or is it just everything has to be scripted all the time, the way it's set up?
I'm glad you asked that. So, and I actually went off on a rant with my cohort about how poorly some of these credentialing programs are preparing our teachers for the schools that they're actually going into. And so schools like ours that have, we tend to have teachers that, are first to third year, and we turn over a lot. not through any fault of our own, but it's not easy to dive in when you don't have like necessarily clear curriculum expectations, or when you don't necessarily have materials and things like that. So I say all that to say that scripted programs work well so that you can learn the program. And then once you have an understanding of the format, so when I think about SWON math, and I know this isn't a math conversation, when I think about SWON math, there's a definite format to the lessons, and there's a script there. Once you figured out how the format works, once you understand what you're supposed to be doing at each block of time and what the goals are and objectives are, then you have some freedom around, modifying it to meet the needs of your kids. I think that starting out with a script is great because I don't necessarily need you to be creative when you're trying to teach my kids to read, right? There's a formula for that. There's a diagnostic for that. There's an if that, then this. And so I don't necessarily want you taking liberties with that. I would like for you to follow the script until you have an understanding of what the expectations are and what kids' needs are.
But if you have the expertise, so I hear you, but if you have the expertise, let's say you've been a successful teacher, meaning that your kids are learning how to read consistently over years, you see it or whatever it is, you've internalized the program, you get it, you understand it, and now you want to sprinkle some secret sauce on there, or you happen to know, you see a few kids over there struggling in this particular area, and you feel based on your expertise and your professional judgment that you want to do X, you want to zig instead of zag, but you can still get to the same goal. Is that do these programs, Wit and Wisdom, Expeditionary Learning Education, and Bookworms, do they allow for that? Is that possible to do within the sphere of these programs?
I would say with EL Ed you could. I would say with EL Ed that you could. I would say there's a lot of room, and that part, Kareem, depends on what the level of collaboration is across grade levels and across, sites. If you've got strong collaboration and one teacher is seeing like success, but you guys are supposed to be doing the same thing, but this person has some expertise in an area and can kind of shine a light on where the gap is, share that with the team, right? Be fluid in your groups. Maybe this group of kids goes to this teacher for this, maybe we make some shifts and loops like that. I say yes, there's room for that in Bookworms and in EL Ed. With Wit and Wisdom, you're so bogged down by the amount of time that the lessons take and the amount of planning that goes into them and the pacing that you don't really have an opportunity to do that unless you completely decompose your schedule and you have like a day where we're only doing writing, one day where language arts instruction is just writing, one day where it's just vocabulary development, one day where it's, so you'd have to like rework your entire situation in order to make that happen for Wit and Wisdom.
So I just have a couple more questions. I'm not going to kill too much more of your time. There's a big emphasis now on foundational skills being taught because for so long we just didn't do it adequately. We didn't do enough foundational skills. The question is, do these various programs support the teaching of foundational skills? Do they do a good job of it? Is it in their core program, or do you have to supplement it with another program to teach foundational skills? How do they address foundational skills?
The thing I appreciated about the salespeople from Wit and Wisdom is that they told us straight up, you're gonna have to do something else for K2. We don't have it. And they made some suggestions, but teachers said, you know what? Let's just take OCR Green. We know that it works. So they had, K2 did some work around that. And
for people who don't know what OCR Green, that's the open court reading green section for the, okay. All right. Got you.
Right. So with, and 3rd through 5th, we, heavy on LLI, level literacy instruction. And
right.
And that's where we kind of focused our reading partners. That's where we focused our tutoring in the 3rd through 5th grade because K2 felt like they had it on lock with OCR Green. And then we also had Saturday Academy and things like that. And that was for the Wit and Wisdom lift. For EL Ed, the K2 teachers feel like it's better, but they're still asking like that. Well, some of them asked and some of them just went ahead and did it. Like, we're going to go ahead and go back to, using some of the open court reading green section for letter sounds, and for, like the decodables and things like that, because they felt like it was just better targeted to student needs.
And that's the teachers. I mean, part of it is teacher agency of saying it's not enough for my kids, or yeah. I think my kids need something more. It's not even so much changing a program as it is saying, hey, I got to get more in my kids in their hands or do more with them. So they kind of did that on their own.
Yeah,
Okay.
they did. After doing the expeditionary learning PDs over the summer and things like that, they were still very excited about the rest of the program. But they looked at, over the few years that they've been teaching and looked at the level of instruction for foundational skills, or like, this isn't enough. We need to be hammering this more and they feel the urgency. If we don't get this right by kinder first grade, then by the time they hit second grade, which is where you'll see a lot of our pitfalls, if, by the time you hit second grade, and our kids still aren't able to read, at least a few multisyllabic words, they don't have understanding of prefixes and affixes and things like that, then, it's all downhill from third grade on. Yeah. So, kudos to them for stepping out and being like, we'll just add things in, we'll add it in. So they're not taking anything away, they're adding in. Bookworms, the only section that we were looking at was the foundational skills, which were pretty strong as well.
Okay. Let's see. Did conditions of success. Oh, two more things. So kids that are behind. So you mentioned 3rd through 5th grade. Mm-hmm. A lot of times programs have foundational skills in K through 2, mm-hmm. and then 3rd through 5, it's more, it's a different type of thing. But we find that a lot of kids are still behind in 4th grade, 5th grade. They may be 2-3 years behind in 5th grade. Mm-hmm. So do these programs have, do they still, whether it's through differentiation or however they do it, is there still support for kids who are behind in upper elementary?
In Wit and Wisdom, there's not. We relied very heavily on LLI and SIPs. In expeditionary learning, I know it exists, but because of the format, we're in virtual learning right now, so we're still relying very heavily on LLI and SIPs. And Bookworms, we were only looking at for primary. So
let me conclude with this. First of all, thank you. I appreciate your time. Very helpful. But if the committee for ELA adoption K through 5 is meeting now. They've been meeting for a long time and we've been piloting for a couple of years, and now we're getting to the point where they're narrowing down the choices they have. They're looking at Wit and Wisdom. They're looking at Journeys and Bookworms and CKLA, and you name it. They've got like a list that they're going through. Mm-hmm. From where you sit as an administrator, if you could talk directly, because they'll see this, I'm going to send this to them. What would you say to them? What would you tell them? What do you think they should know about any aspect of the curriculum selection process for K-5, ELA, and OUSD?
I would say you can't compare students in Oakland to students in districts that don't look like ours, right? So we have to focus on foundational learning pre-K-5. We've got to find something that has foundational, phonics, letter sounds, high frequency words, just all of that word building and things like that, and vocabulary development throughout, from pre-primary all the way up to 5th grade, because our kids come in at different entry levels. We have to have something that isn't such a huge lift that schools have to make the decisions between bringing professional development from outside onto the campus in order to train teachers across years, or buying books, right? Because that's really the decision. The decision is, do we have the books at every level that the kids need and will be interested in, or do we pay for PD so that teachers can teach kids to read the books? Which is, those are the decisions that we're faced with. It's got to be something that, and I'm, like the dream would be something that's an all-in-one. If you're going to buy curriculum, buy something that has like all the books in it already, and then give suggestions for, extended reading across levels. Because right now schools are making decisions around like, oh, well, I'll have to buy RAS Kids, I'll have to buy other computer programs so that I can make sure that kids at every level can access this, new ZLA, things like that. It's just, if we're gonna make a commitment, we should commit to something that will meet the needs of all of our kids. especially our Black and brown students who, again, may not come from a written language, but enter at 3rd grade and are expected to be reading and assessing and by, the end of 4th. So I would just entreat you to really think about what looks nice and what sounds good, but worked in, a suburban district and not necessarily a district that looks like ours. And we're special, Oakland is special. We have kids across every possible spectrum, but really we need to be focusing on making sure that our kids can read first and foremost.
Got you. Thank you, Principal Hawkinson Gray. Much appreciated. I know you're busy. Matter of fact, stuff.